Hi, my name is Leesha, and this quarter I started a new project that's about coordinating more continual support in a learning community like Agile Research Studios and doing that through orchestration technologies. I'm calling the project Nithyasa, which it comes from my native language Malayalam, but Nitya means continual support or perpetual help in my language. So that's where the name comes from. I wanted to start. So this project is really inspired by the work that I had been doing previously on a crowdsourcing project called CrowdCheer. So I just wanted to give you a quick overview of what the work looked like in that context, so that you to help understand what it would look like in a learning environment. Um, so CrowdCheer is this system that uses this continual support architecture that I now want to think about using in Agile Research Studios. But it basically tries to monitor a user's experience and then provide continuous support by coordinating this detection of needs and then help resources and connecting helpers to those who need help in real time. So this is just sort of the architecture that we used, where you will monitor the workers and requesters in the crowd. You kind of match based on different information you have about what would be an appropriate support task. You prime the person to complete the support task, verify that it's been completed, and then kind of update the status of the worker and the requester, the people who are giving and receiving help. And I was looking at that and studying that system in the context of marathon races and really thinking about how a crowd of spectators might provide more distributed motivational support for runners. Um, and so we kind of created this race dashboard view. Let me zoom out a little bit if my computer will cooperate. But basically, it's this race dashboard view where you have this primary task up at the top where you're cheering for a runner that you care about, like a friend or family member. But the app is also giving you contextual information about people who you could cheer for that are participating in the race and are nearby. So these are people you could cheer for while you're waiting for your runner to appear. And it does this coordination of support across the duration of the race. So this idea of continual crowd support really informed my next project, and I have been thinking a lot about how solving these types of challenges really allows us to think about how to provide more on-demand support to overcome barriers as they arise, which is really relevant in a learning environment. So I wanted to leverage this continual support approach as we started to think about how to scale models like Agile Research Studios. And to give a little information about what Agile Research Studios are, I've been saying that a lot. If you're not familiar with it, it's basically this model that is a socio-technical system for scaling research training that really allows us to combine work processes inspired by Agile methodologies, these social structures of different groupings of the people who are participating in the studio, and then design technologies that allow us to create this research community of practice and really make use of the expertise and resources that are across the community to respond to the needs and to really support progress making on research projects. And we use this model to train 30 plus undergraduates at scale to really drive their own independent research. So we are running our own Agile Research Studio, obviously, called DTR at Northwestern. We have a pretty big community, and yeah, I mean, within this community, there's we want to think about really using these orchestration technologies to support this type of continual support architecture within the community. So what would it look like to kind of detect the really diverse student needs within the community, really recognizing and identifying the actions and then the help resources to meet those needs, and then connecting the resources and needs in a way that's really cognizant of the knowledge, awareness, expertise, availability of support across the community. And we want to do this through this mixed initiative approach that isn't just reliant on mentors monitoring and keeping track of what's going on in the studio, but isn't completely reliant on technology to really support the training and mentorship of students. So we really think a mixed initiative approach will help us leverage the capabilities of both humans and machines to help us change the way organizations work and hopefully increase the quality and then scale of research training over time. So this quarter, I was really focusing on understanding how to do this. A lot of the work that I had been doing this quarter at the beginning was just understanding what this project is really about because it's a big project. Um, so I spent a lot of the beginning of the quarter working through and preparing the NSF GRFP grant to help me crystallize this vision a little bit more. And a lot of this quarter has been really trying to find direction with the project through different questions that I've had. Um, so one of the first areas that I started thinking about was if we want to really kind of like monitor and detect how students are doing, what are the observable and measurable challenges that students are encountering that might signal support needs within the community? So I thought about starting with sprint logs and really trying to so sprint logs, for context, these are the tools that students use to, on a sprint by sprint basis, which are like 2 weeks long, plan out their research and what they're going to be doing, the specific tasks and stories that they plan to do over that period. So I was wondering, like through these logs that students are already using, are there actual observable challenges that we could detect from these logs? So I started going through and analyzing these sprint logs. So for example, there are ones that we already have kind of encoded visually that might indicate that there's something wrong. So a student might have committed more points than they actually have available. A student might be creating these like really large tasks that maybe might signal that it's worth breaking that task down a little bit, or they might not know the work that is entailed with that task, and they might need to think about decomposing it a little bit. Or maybe they're spending too much time on a task, more hours spent than the actual time that they thought it would be required to complete the task. And these are all signals that might indicate a student needs help replanning and rethinking what how they might want to spend their time. So I went through sprint logs for like across the studio for all the students, and I started generating this list of like what are the actual measurable symptoms that you can get from these sprint logs, and then what might be the possible meaning or like the root challenge attached to that symptom that we detected in the sprint log. And then I wanted to start thinking about what support might be needed in response to that challenge. And then I started thinking about this idea of fixed support versus continual support. So the fixed support is more what are kind of like the fixed events that already occur in studio. So you have your SIG meetings, you have your mentor program where you could ask the mentor that you're paired with. There are office hours that you could attend. So there are these like fixed events or like activities that you could participate in. But there's also this idea of continual support. So in between these fixed events, how might we kind of like punctuate that with indicating to a student that they're struggling and giving them the opportunity to seek help, or a mentor recognizing it and reaching out to that student that provides more continual support throughout the sprints and throughout a student's project progress. And then as I was doing this, I got some really good feedback, and I realized that there are some limitations to this approach. So by doing this approach and just looking at sprint logs, I'm actually only looking at one facet of the larger ecosystem of Agile research studios, right? Like if I'm just looking at the sprint logs, I might not actually be catching the critical issues across the studio and across all the data that we have that might really indicate a demand for support within the studio. So I tried a different approach. I wanted to then start thinking more about what are the types of queries that mentors are making. So mentors are really trying regularly to understand at a studio level what's going on with the studio, but then at a project level, at a SIG level, what's going on with the project. And they're constantly making these queries to really like understand the state of what's going on. And I wanted to better understand those types of queries. that they use to just build up this mental model of the studio state and project state. So I did a bunch of need finding interviews to really get a sense of that. And I was trying to break down and understand um, really like what are the types of queries that mentors are making to update that model. Where are they actually getting this information currently? Um, and then like what are they trying to assess with that query? So like what's the like end point that they're trying to understand by making that query and looking at a specific piece of information. So they might get information from like messaging a student over Slack, or maybe just ad hoc conversation. They came into the office and ran into a student. Maybe it came up in office hours or in the SIG meeting itself. Maybe they noticed it by watching a peer research session and seeing what a student was requesting for help. So there are all these different types of signals of information um, that mentors are relying on when they're really monitoring the state of the studio and the state of the students. So there's a limitation to this approach too, right? So if I kind of like take this approach, I'm really getting a lot of information overload, and we also already have a pretty good sense of what mentors do and like the types of queries that they make. The real question that I wanted to be asking or meant to be asking, which again I learned through feedback, was I want to have a sense of where the actual breakdowns are. So um, throughout all of these monitoring tasks, where is it really difficult for mentors to keep track of what's going on? And then also, um, of those things, what are the most critical issues that will really affect a student's progress? Those are the types of things that we really want to be paying attention to, like the consequential breakdowns within the studio. So Hauchi and Nell really helped me out here, and they spent some time thinking through what are the things they actually lose track of in studio. And they basically brainstormed a list of like at the end of the quarter they sat down and they thought, what are all the things that we like totally lost track of this quarter? Because these are the types of things that are really taking up their mental space, and it really helped me understand as a mentor what are the challenges to actually orchestrating a community like an agile research studio, and that's really what I was trying to get at. So as I was going through this list, I kind of realized that there are sort of like I'm thinking about them as like these three classes of things that mentors try and keep track of within a studio. So one is sort of like this these like studio wide, they're like semi-fixed reminder type tasks. So for example, like when do we actually schedule open house? When do we schedule mid-quarter assessments? It might be nice to know around week 4 that it's time for mid-quarter assessments so that we could like remember to generate those templates and send them out to students and do that a week in advance so that we're ready to discuss their self-assessments at mid-quarter. And these are all things that are really difficult to keep track of that are sort of um, they're like semi-fixed because it requires context to really know when to um, schedule that. Like, what does week 4 actually look like when you're thinking about designing a system to remind you of that? And then so that's one type of thing to keep track of. Another type is slightly deeper than that, which is more on the project status or SIG status that are related to more like planning tasks. So um, an example of that might be is a student like how is the student doing in terms of their research plan that we talked about in SIG meeting? I presented them with a plan. Um, then we like talked through what they might be doing over this next sprint, but are they kind of like off the rails, and how might I like kind of pay attention to how they're doing um, in terms of their immediate planning and their like project progress? And then there's a third type of task that's even deeper than that, which is at more like the research direction level, I think. So at a higher level, like does the student have like what's almost like the state of the student's conceptual understanding of their research, um, and how are they doing on that? I need to think a little bit more about these three different classes, but that's just kind of like a very initial um, my take on what these different things, the different types of things a mentor needs to keep track of and tends to lose track of um, when they're trying to understand the state of their studio and how to orchestrate support across it. So in terms of what's next for this project, I feel like just towards the end of the quarter, I really started to understand what my actual questions were and like how to really scope down this project to get concrete about like what is challenging about orchestration in a studio. So in terms of next steps, um, I want to start thinking about how to build a system that really helps orchestrate a studio by just really building awareness across the studio. And I think at a high level, that's going to involve shifting this focus from the like first level tests that I talked about that were kind of those like studio wide reminder type tasks that take up a lot of space in a mentor's head. Like a lot of the tasks in that list are more like things that they just lost track of because they're like these constant things that are happening every quarter that they really need to keep track of to sustain a studio. So if we could shift the focus of mentors from those types of tasks to the more important stuff, getting down into the like deeper research direction tasks and monitoring that mentors are really good at, and we could think about how to design orchestration technologies to help with um, the lighter weight stuff, if you will. So I've been thinking about to shift from the um, to shift from those like sort of like studio wide semi-fixed reminder type tasks to more of the deeper project planning, to think of a smart reminders type system that might prompt for things like scheduling recruiting and open house and mid-quarter check-ins and when we should be doing DTR interviews that are like really thinking about at a studio-wide level, like for example, who should we be recruiting, what skills are we losing as students are graduating, what projects really need support as we're thinking about recruiting, and helping us keep track of these things. um, and then that allows mentors to focus on things like project planning. And to support with the project planning, we've been thinking about what would it look like to almost have like a side by side plan for an advisor and a student working on a project. So a student comes in, they have their sprint plan, but the advisor is actually giving them a ton of advice on their project throughout the SIG meeting, and giving them very clear direction and contingency plans and all of this type of stuff that isn't really tracked anywhere. And mentors in the following SIG meeting need to remember what was the advice that I gave that student, um, and really understand what the delta is between what the student did and what they had advised them, and that's difficult to keep track of. Um, so what if we could design these views for both students and mentors where we could keep track of what was like the proposed plan, what are like the proposed revisions on the plan, what are some contingency plans that you might want to prepare for, um, and students can use that, and hopefully that would support the execution of the plan a little bit more, and it would also support a mentor's ability to remember what was actually the context of where we were at last time going into the next week. So that's kind of the future direction that I've been thinking about for the project and what I will hopefully start prototyping and designing next quarter. Thank you.